Dubai gleamed under the opulent lights of the skyline, a glittering city that stood as a beacon of wealth, ambition, and perfection. The towering skyscrapers rose like monuments to success, their glass facades reflecting the sun's golden touch, while beneath them, the world's elite moved with a polished grace, their every step calculated to maintain the facade of wealth and power. In the midst of this city, where reputation was everything and status was a currency unto itself, there was no man more admired, more envied than Sheikh Zayed Al-Majid. At 30, Zayed had become the embodiment of success. His name was synonymous with influence, luxury, and power. Born into one of Dubai's oldest merchant families, he had inherited not just wealth, but an empire built on years of carefully cultivated deals, power plays, and relentless ambition. His sharp suits, expensive taste, and refined manners made him the ultimate catch, a man every woman dreamed of and every man aspired to be. To the world, Zayed was perfect, the epitome of what every young Emirati male should aspire to be. The ideal businessman, the ideal gentleman, and soon the ideal husband. His fiancée, Afreen, was just as flawless in the eyes of society. At 28, she was a woman of grace and sophistication, a member of one of Dubai's most respected families. Her beauty was undeniable, her intelligence sharp, and her social standing impeccable. She was everything a man like Zayed could desire in a partner, elegant, poised, and bred to be the perfect wife. To their families, their union was the culmination of years of tradition, a match made in heaven that would unite two of Dubai's most powerful families. Afreen, with her poised smile and soft laughter, was the crown jewel in Zayed's already perfect life. But behind closed doors, Zayed's world was far more complex. While the glittering city watched and admired his every move, Zayed lived a life hidden from public view, a life that was both his heart's desire and his greatest burden. In London, far from the prying eyes of Dubai, Zayed was already married. To Sarah. Sarah was everything Afreen wasn't. She was raw and real, a woman who had seen Zayed at his most vulnerable and loved him not for his wealth, but for his heart. She was 25, intelligent, and a woman with whom Zayed had shared his deepest thoughts, his dreams, and his fears. Their bond was forged not by luxury or family ties, but by love, a love that had survived the tests of time and distance. While Zayed had built his empire in Dubai, Sarah had built a life of her own in London. Together, they had 2 children who were unaware of the vast world their father occupied in Dubai. To Sarah, Zayed was not the businessman the world admired, but the man she had married and raised a family with. Zayed's heart, however, remained torn between the 2 worlds he had created. Afreen, with her bright future and impeccable pedigree, represented everything that was expected of him. The family legacy, the expectations of Dubai's elite, and the pressure to conform were overwhelming. His father's death had only added to the burden, forcing Zayed to return to Dubai and take on the full weight of the family business. But despite everything, his heart, his soul was tied to Sarah. Zayed had kept his secret well. To Afreen, he was the perfect fiancé, attentive, affectionate, and deeply invested in their future together. He had been careful, calculated in his movements, always ensuring that his 2 lives never intersected. He'd built the perfect facade, hiding his family in London behind the veil of business trips and the pressures of running a billion-dollar empire. But the weight of his deception had begun to press on him. Every smile he shared with Afreen, every promise he made, was a lie, and the guilt was starting to take its toll. As the wedding date loomed closer, the pressure on Zayed grew unbearable. Afreen, now more eager than ever to make their marriage official, pushed him relentlessly to finalize the plans. Every conversation revolved around their wedding, their future together, and the perfect life they would build in Dubai. Zayed felt suffocated by the expectations, his father's legacy, and the ever-present pressure to marry Afreen. But no matter how many promises he made, no matter how many grand gestures he executed, the one truth that lingered in his mind was Sarah. His family, his children, his love for her. These were things he couldn't walk away from. Zayed had known this day would come, the day when the truth would have to be revealed. But each time he thought about confessing, the fear of losing everything paralyzed him. His family would disown him. His business empire would crumble. And worst of all, Sarah and their children would be dragged into the public eye, exposed for all the wrong reasons. The thought of that suffering was unbearable. The pressure was mounting. And with his father's death, Zayed knew that the time for pretending was quickly running out. His father had always pushed him to marry Afreen, to uphold the family's name and wealth. But now that his father was gone, the obligation felt suffocating. Zayed's internal battle reached its peak, his emotions at war with each other. In his heart, he knew he had to choose between the life he had with Sarah in London and the life he was expected to lead in Dubai with Afreen. As the days passed, Zayed's anxiety grew. He couldn't escape the mounting pressure. His phone calls to Sarah became more frequent, their conversations more desperate. She too was aware of the strain. She had always been patient with him, understanding the weight of his responsibilities. But even she could sense the cracks in his carefully constructed world. Sarah had begun to wonder how much longer they could keep up the charade. Would Zayed finally choose her? Or would he succumb to the expectations of his family and the demands of Dubai's elite? But for now, Zayed kept his secret hidden. He smiled for the cameras, played the perfect fiancé for Afreen, and walked through life with the air of a man who had everything. In the eyes of the world, Zayed was flawless, untouchable, admired, and envied by all. But deep inside, he knew the truth. The perfect facade he had built was fragile, and sooner or later, it would shatter, revealing everything he had worked so hard to keep hidden. The question was no longer if his double life would be exposed, but when. And when that moment came, Zayed's carefully crafted world would come crashing down, bringing with it a storm of consequences he couldn't control. The price of perfection was about to be paid, and no one, least of all Zayed, could predict how devastating the fallout would be. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with the kind of preparation that only Dubai's elite could orchestrate. A frenzy of endless fittings, venue bookings, and meticulously curated guest lists. Afreen, with her family's help, ensured that every detail was flawless, from the towering floral arrangements to the shimmering gold accents that reflected the opulence of her upbringing. Her excitement was palpable. For her, this was the culmination of a dream of a perfect life with the perfect man. Zayed, on the other hand, felt the weight of the preparations press on him like a suffocating cloak. To the outside world, he remained the calm, composed businessman, the man whose life was a carefully constructed monument to success. But behind the closed doors of his penthouse, the anxiety that had been building for months was beginning to take its toll. Every time Afreen smiled at him, every time she spoke of their future, he was reminded of the lie that hung between them, a lie that he could no longer keep hidden. As Afreen busied herself with wedding plans, Zayed retreated further into his own mind. His guilt was a constant companion, gnawing at him, pulling him in two different directions. He knew that Afreen deserved the truth. She deserved the honesty of knowing the man she was about to marry was not the man she thought he was. But the truth was a dangerous thing. It would destroy everything: his family's reputation, his business empire, and his carefully guarded life in Dubai. Yet, the more Zayed tried to bury his guilt, the more it grew, like a fire that had started in the shadows, but was now threatening to engulf him completely. His father's recent passing had placed a heavy burden on him, one that was made worse by the pressure of carrying on the family legacy. He was expected to marry Afreen, to maintain the image of the perfect businessman, the ideal son. He had already sacrificed so much to keep up this facade. His relationship with Sarah, his children, the life he had promised them. But the weight of it all was becoming unbearable. Zayed found himself waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, his mind racing. His thoughts would always drift to Sarah, her soft laughter, the warmth of her touch, the two children they had created together. They were the family he had wanted, the family he had always dreamed of. But the reality of his situation was clear. He couldn't have both. The world would never allow it, and the pressure to conform was only intensifying. Across the world, In London, Sarah was dealing with her own struggle. She knew that Zayed was slipping further away from her, emotionally distant and caught up in his business dealings in Dubai. Their conversations had grown shorter, his responses more curt. She had always been patient, understanding of the fact that his responsibilities in Dubai kept him busy, but something felt different now. It wasn't just the long silences between their calls, or the lack of intimacy in their conversations. It was the cryptic messages she had started receiving, photos of Zayed with Afreen, snapshots from the engagement events that had been taking place in Dubai. At first, Sarah had brushed it off, telling herself it was a misunderstanding or a cruel joke. But as the messages became more frequent and more detailed, she began to worry. The messages didn't just show pictures. They were accompanied by text, subtle hints about Zayed's life in Dubai. Sarah had always known that Zayed was hiding something, but she had never imagined that the truth could be so devastating. Her frustration grew each day, but so did her love for him. She missed him deeply, the way she used to feel when they were together, the bond they shared that felt unbreakable. But now Sarah felt torn. Should she confront him? Should she ask him about Afreen? Or should she stay silent and try to piece together the life Zayed had built in Dubai without her? In the quiet of her flat in London, Sarah found herself wondering if this was the end of the life they had built together. She had always been patient, always stood by him, but now the truth seemed to be inching closer and closer, threatening to destroy everything. As Zayed's wedding date approached, Afreen's excitement reached a fever pitch. Every moment seemed to be consumed with thoughts of the wedding. What dress she would wear, how the ceremony would unfold, which flowers would line the aisles. She felt secure in the love Zayed had always shown her, the promises he made, the assurances that he was as invested in their future as she was. But as her excitement grew, so did the pressure on Zayed. Afreen, now more eager than ever, began to demand more of his attention. Their wedding day was approaching fast, and she wanted to feel the certainty that Zayed was as committed as she was. She would frequently ask him, sometimes in passing, how he was feeling about the wedding, whether he had any lingering doubts. Zayed, ever the diplomat, would reassure her that everything was fine, that they were meant to be, that this was the next natural step in their journey together. But the weight of the lies was becoming too much. Each time Afreen spoke of their future, Zayed's stomach turned. He could not keep living this double life, this balancing act where everything was for show, where he kept secrets from the people he loved the most. It was all starting to collapse under the pressure. As the wedding drew nearer, Zayed realized that he couldn't continue like this. He had to tell Afreen the truth. But the fear of what would happen if he did, the fallout, the destruction of his family's name, the collapse of everything he had built, kept him in a state of paralysis. The longer he waited, the more the burden grew. Zayed had spent years carefully crafting his perfect life, keeping his two families in separate worlds, never allowing them to meet, to overlap. But now, with Afreen's increasing demands and his growing guilt, Zayed knew he was running out of time. He had to confront the truth before it destroyed him and everyone else, too. It was a decision he knew would change everything. He couldn't hide any longer. He would tell Afreen everything after the wedding. That way, at least, he would be able to say that he had honored the tradition, the legacy, and the family he had built in Dubai, and then, perhaps, he could rebuild the life he had once shared with Sarah. But in that moment, in the quiet of his thoughts, Zayed realized something more terrifying. What if, in telling Afreen the truth, he lost everything? His family, his reputation, and the love of both women. What if the perfect life he had worked so hard to create was gone forever? The lies were no longer sustainable, but the consequences of the truth were far more horrifying. The night of the wedding was nothing short of a spectacle. The venue, one of Dubai's most luxurious hotels, was bathed in a soft golden glow, its walls adorned with intricate crystal chandeliers that seemed to capture the very essence of wealth and splendor. The ballroom shimmered with opulence, the laughter of the elite echoing around the room as champagne flowed freely, and the air buzzed with excitement. Zayed and Afreen stood at the center, their faces radiant with joy. To everyone around them, they were the perfect couple, young, successful, and poised to lead the future of Dubai's elite society. But beneath the perfection, a different story was brewing. Zayed stood beside Afreen, his smile practiced, his eyes a bit distant, as though trapped in a world that wasn't entirely his. His heart wasn't in the celebration. It was somewhere far away, somewhere he had left behind in London. But he couldn't afford to think about that now. Tonight he had to play his part. He had to be the groom, the man Afreen and their families expected him to be. There was no turning back. The night unfolded as planned. An elegant reception, the customary speeches, and the first dance that seemed to solidify the image of a happy couple, destined for greatness. Afreen, dressed in a gown that glittered like the stars above the desert, beamed with joy, her eyes never leaving Zayed. She was everything a man could want, beautiful, graceful, and thoroughly enamored with him. And Zayed, ever the actor, returned her smile, playing the role to perfection. But inside, the weight of the truth pressed on him harder with each passing moment. As he danced with Afreen, he couldn't shake the growing realization that the mask he wore so effortlessly in public was slipping. He had kept his secret for so long. His family in London, his children, Sarah. But the moment was coming. The moment when he would have to admit everything, face the consequences, and live with the fallout. As the last song of the night played, Zayed felt a shift in the air, a tension that wasn't there before. Afreen, her eyes sparkling with happiness, leaned in close and whispered, "I can't wait for our life to begin, Zayed. Everything is going to be perfect, just like this night." Her words, meant to reassure him, did the opposite. He smiled and nodded, but his heart raced. This was it, the moment he had feared. The moment when he would have to shatter her image of the man she had just married, to break the illusion of the perfect life they were about to lead. He couldn't lie any longer. Later that night, when the guests had finally departed, and the suite grew quiet, Zayed and Afreen were left alone. The hotel's luxurious ambience seemed distant now, the golden walls closing in on Zayed as he sat across from Afreen, his heart pounding in his chest. She had already changed into her nightgown, and the soft fabric of her dress contrasted with the cold dread that settled in Zayed's stomach. Afreen smiled at him, her eyes filled with love. "I'm so happy, Zayed," she said softly. "We're finally together. All those years of waiting, and now we get to build our life." Zayed swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in deeper. He could see how happy she was, how completely she believed in their future together, and that only made the truth sting harder. He had betrayed her in the most unforgivable way. She deserved so much more than this. He took a deep breath, struggling to find the words. "Afreen, there's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice trembling. "Something I should have told you before." Afreen's smile faltered slightly, her brow furrowing in concern. "What is it, Zayed? You're scaring me." Zayed's gaze dropped to his hands, his fingers trembling. "I've been hiding something from you, something you deserve to know." Afreen's concern deepened. "Zayed, what are you talking about?" Zayed met her eyes, the guilt overwhelming him. "I'm not the man you think I am, Afreen. I'm married to someone else. I have 2 children. In London." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Afreen's face drained of color, her eyes wide with disbelief. What are you saying?" "I'm married to Sarah," Zayed continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have 2 children with her. I never meant for this to happen, but I've been living a lie. I've been torn between 2 lives, and now I don't know what to do." Afreen sat in stunned silence, her breath catching in her throat. She couldn't comprehend what he was saying. The man she had just married, the man who had promised her everything, was already married to someone else with a family of his own. It was as if the ground beneath her feet had cracked open, and she was falling into a void. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling with anger and betrayal. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me before? I've been waiting for this day, for this life with you, and you've been living a lie." Zayed's eyes were filled with regret. "I was afraid, Afreen. I was trapped. My family, my legacy, everything was at stake. I thought if I could just keep up the facade a little longer, everything would be fine. But I was wrong. I should have been honest with you. Afreen stood up, her body trembling with fury. You should have been honest with me? You think that's enough? She turned away from him, her voice rising. You've ruined everything, Zayed. You've ruined my life, my future. You've made a fool of me. Zayed's heart clenched. He reached out to her, but she stepped back, her eyes blazing with anger. You don't understand, do you? You think you can just tell me this and expect me to forgive you? You've taken everything from me. My trust, my love, my future. And now, you want me to pretend it's all okay. In a moment of pure rage, Afreen's words turned sharper, colder. If you think you're going to get away with this, Zayed, you're wrong. I will expose you. I will tell everyone about your secret life. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are. Your business will collapse, your family will turn against you, and everything you've worked for will be gone. Zayed's heart raced as she spoke, his mind spinning with the weight of her words. Afreen, please, he begged, his voice barely audible. Don't do this. Please, don't destroy me. Afreen's eyes narrowed, her fury palpable. You destroyed me first, Zayed. I'll make sure your lies are exposed to the world. And don't think I won't do it. I'll make sure your family knows about your hidden marriage, your children, everything. I'll make sure you lose everything. Zayed's blood ran cold as the gravity of her threat sank in. He had known this moment might come, but he had never imagined it would unfold like this. His carefully crafted world, his reputation, everything he had built, was now on the verge of crumbling. As Afreen stood there, seething with anger, Zayed knew he had lost everything. The silence in the suite was suffocating. Zayed stood, trembling, as the weight of his actions began to press down on him. Afreen's anger had reached a breaking point, and with every word she spoke, the walls around him seemed to close in tighter. She was resolute, determined to expose him and destroy everything he had worked for. Zayed's mind raced, his thoughts a blur of fear and guilt. The years of deception, the lies he had carefully constructed, it was all unraveling before his eyes. He had always known this moment might come, but he had never imagined it would unfold like this. His entire life, his family, his reputation, his business empire, was on the verge of collapsing, and it was all because of one mistake. Afreen's anger was relentless, and as she threatened to destroy him, Zayed's desperation grew. He could feel the ground beneath him shifting, his carefully built world crumbling with every word she uttered. Panic gripped him. He couldn't let her expose him. The consequences would be too severe, the loss of everything he had ever known. In a moment of pure emotional collapse, Zayed reached out, his hands shaking. The world around him seemed to blur, his emotions overwhelming his judgment. He grabbed Afreen, his grip tight, desperate to silence her, to stop the destruction she was threatening. The struggle was brief but intense. Zayed's mind was clouded with panic and fear, and in that moment of sheer desperation, his actions became erratic, impulsive. The violence of the moment escalated, and in the heat of the argument, Zayed shoved Afreen down onto the bed. She didn't fight back. She lay there, still, her eyes wide in shock. Zayed stood frozen, staring at the lifeless body in front of him. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind couldn't process the horror of what had just happened. The reality of his actions sank in slowly, each heartbeat a reminder of the unthinkable thing he had just done. His perfect world, the life he had built, the reputation he had crafted with years of effort, was shattered in an instant. The truth, buried beneath layers of lies, was now exposed in the most violent and irreversible way. The woman he had just married, the woman who had been so full of hope and love for him, was now gone. The silence in the room was deafening. Zayed stood there, his breath shallow, his body frozen with shock and regret. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The consequences were irreversible. As the shock of his actions began to settle in, Zayed realized the full extent of the destruction he had caused. Afreen's death would send shockwaves through Dubai's elite society. The investigators would uncover his hidden life in London, the secrets he had kept from Afreen, and now this unthinkable act of violence. Word of Afrin's death spread quickly. Zayed's carefully curated world of power, wealth, and influence began to crumble. His business empire, once a symbol of success, was now a sinking ship. His family disowned him, his partners turned their backs, and the world that had once admired him now despised him. In London, Sarah received the news with heartbreak. Zayed, the man she had loved and trusted, was a murderer. The life they had built, the future they had dreamed of, was destroyed. The shock of the revelation left Sarah devastated, questioning everything she had ever known about the man she had married. Zayed's life, once filled with promise and power, had been obliterated in one tragic moment. The illusion of perfection, the facade of success, was shattered, leaving only the painful reality of his actions. And in the aftermath, there was nothing but ruin. The aftermath of Afrin's death unfolded with an intensity that left no one untouched. The whispers of the murder spread like wildfire through the corridors of Dubai's elite society, and before long, the once glittering image of Zayed al-Majid was reduced to nothing more than a shadow of disgrace. Investigators were quick to dive into the case, and as they began peeling back the layers of Zayed's life, the truth they uncovered was both shocking and horrifying. Zayed's secret life, one he had so carefully guarded for years, was now exposed for the world to see. His marriage to Sarah, a woman he had kept hidden in London, came to light, along with the 2 children they had together. For months, he had juggled 2 families in 2 separate worlds, keeping them apart with elaborate lies and manipulations. The investigators uncovered a web of deception that spanned continents, each thread leading to another carefully constructed story designed to keep Afrin and the rest of the world in the dark. But as the truth began to surface, it wasn't just Zayed's personal life that was under scrutiny. It was his entire public persona. His business empire, once a shining example of success, was now crumbling under the weight of scandal. The shockwaves of his actions rippled through Dubai's social circles, and the elite society that had once celebrated him now recoiled in horror. Zayed had been a figurehead for everything that Dubai's wealthy families had worked so hard to build. The facade of perfection, of family legacy, and the idea that success could be bought and maintained at any cost. But now, the cracks in that facade were too wide to ignore. The public's outcry was immediate and intense. News outlets from all corners of the globe covered the story, detailing every facet of Zayed's deception. His once loyal business partners severed ties with him, and his family distanced themselves from the scandal. The city of Dubai, a place known for its opulence and the curated perfection of its elite, was now forced to confront the darker truths that had been hidden beneath the surface for so long. The corruption, the lies, and the manipulation that Zayed had perfected were no longer confined to private circles. They were now on display for the entire world to see. While the public turned its back on Zayed, the consequences of his actions were felt most deeply by those who had loved him. Sarah, now a widow, was left to pick up the shattered pieces of her life. The woman who had once been the love of Zayed's life, the mother of his children, now found herself alone with 2 young children, left to raise them without the man who had promised her everything. The shock of his actions cut deep into Sarah's soul. The man she had married, the father of her children, had been living a double life, and the truth was more than she could bear. She had been a victim of Zayed's lies, just like Afrin, and now she had to face the consequences of loving a man capable of such violence. In London, Sarah's grief was compounded by the reality of her new life. She was left with nothing but the memories of a marriage that had been built on a lie. As the news of Zayed's crime spread, her world became a nightmare. Every newspaper, every news report, every conversation in the street, it all reminded her of the man she had once trusted, and now had to live without. The pain of losing him was deep, but the pain of realizing who he had become was even worse. She was left to question the future, unsure of how she could move on from the wreckage he had left behind. For Zayed, the consequences were swift and unforgiving. He was arrested and charged with Afrin's murder. His trial became a public spectacle, his life dragged through the courts and the media. The courtroom was filled with tension as the details of his secret life were revealed piece by piece. Zayed's once sterling reputation was shredded before the world's eyes. The truth, no longer hidden behind a facade of success, was now laid bare for everyone to see. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that Zayed's life would never be the same. The legal ramifications of his actions were far-reaching, affecting not just him, but both families involved. His business empire, once a symbol of power and wealth, was dismantled piece by piece. His name, once synonymous with success, became a byword for scandal and disgrace. His family, his legacy, all were now tainted by the truth of his actions. Zayed's fate seemed sealed. The court found him guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. But even in prison, Zayed could not escape the consequences of his choices. His life, which had once been filled with privilege and luxury, was now nothing more than a hollow existence. He was a man without a future, stripped of everything he had ever valued. But perhaps the greatest tragedy of all was the reflection on the cultural pressures that had led to Zayed's downfall. His need to maintain the perfect image, the perfect family, the perfect business had consumed him. In a society where reputation and family legacy were everything, Zayed had been trapped by the very expectations that had elevated him to such great heights. The pressure to maintain an image of success, to live up to the legacy of his family, had led him to make choices that ultimately destroyed everything he had worked for. The story of Zayed al-Majid was one of shattered illusions. The wedding, which had been meant to celebrate the beginning of a perfect life, became a tragic tale of loss, betrayal, and murder. His empire, built on lies and deception, crumbled in the wake of his actions. His family, once proud of his success, was now left to pick up the pieces of their broken legacy. In the end, Zayed's story was a cautionary tale of the dangers of living a double life, of the destructive power of reputation and family expectations, and of the cost of sacrificing honesty and integrity for success. Both families were left fractured, with the weight of the truth hanging over them, and the broken legacies of their pasts now laid bare for all to see. For Sarah, the future was uncertain. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted, had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. But the pain of losing him was something she would have to carry with her, a constant reminder of the dangers of living in a world built on false pretenses. And for Dubai's elite society, the lesson was clear. The pursuit of perfection could destroy more than just one man. It could destroy an entire world built on lies.